The Logic of the Moral Sciences by John Stuart Mill. Quotes: The Logic of the Moral Sciences by John Stuart Mill is an exploration of the principles that underpin our understanding of human behavior and society. Originally published as part of his larger work, A System of Logic, this text focuses on the application of scientific methodology to the study of human nature and social sciences. Mill argues for a systematic approach to understanding the complexity of human actions by employing both inductive and deductive reasoning, similar to methods used in the natural sciences. He introduces concepts such as the laws of the mind, ethology, and the idea of causation within social contexts, ultimately aiming to establish a foundation for a rigorous science of morality and human character. Quote 1. The backward state of the moral sciences can only be remedied by applying to them the methods of physical science, duly extended and generalized. Mill argues that the moral sciences have lagged behind due to their failure to adopt systematic and rigorous methodologies similar to those applied in physical sciences. By employing the methods that have proven successful in uncovering truths in natural sciences, it is possible to improve our understanding of moral and social phenomena. This approach involves extending and generalizing scientific techniques to account for the complexity of human behavior and social structures, which have previously been left to speculative reasoning rather than empirical investigation. He emphasizes that using established scientific principles could bring moral sciences to a state where their findings are widely recognized and undisputed. Quote 2. The laws of our rational faculty, like those of every other natural agency, are only learnt by seeing the agent at work. Here, Mill posits that understanding the functioning of human rationality, just like understanding the laws governing natural phenomena, requires observation and practical engagement. We cannot deduce the principles of reason through purely abstract or a priori methods. Instead, we must examine the practical workings of rational thought as it addresses real-world challenges. This approach underscores the need for empirical investigation in understanding the processes by which humans reason, paralleling the methods used in other fields of science. Quote 3. The most sagacious minds have occupied themselves from the earliest date, and have never succeeded in establishing any considerable body of truths so as to be beyond denial or doubt. Mill points out that, despite the efforts of some of the greatest thinkers throughout history, there has been little success in forming an incontrovertible body of knowledge in the moral sciences. Unlike natural sciences, where consensus has been reached on many truths, the study of human behavior remains uncertain and contested. He attributes this ongoing lack of progress to the absence of a structured and scientific approach, which leaves moral and social sciences susceptible to subjective interpretations and controversies. Quote 4. Doubtless, the most effectual mode of showing how the sciences of ethics and politics may be constructed would be to construct them. Mill acknowledges that the best way to demonstrate how to build a scientific foundation for the fields of ethics and politics is to actually do so. However, he admits that this endeavor is beyond the scope of his current work. Instead, he aims to provide a framework or guidance for such a project. He draws a parallel to Francis Bacon, whose work paved the way for scientific advancement without himself undertaking every possible scientific inquiry. This highlights Mill's role as a facilitator who aims to direct others towards building a more robust foundation for moral sciences. Quote 5. Are the actions of human beings, like all other natural events, subject to invariable laws? Mill raises a fundamental question regarding the scientific study of human behavior, whether human actions are governed by consistent laws, just as other natural phenomena are. He acknowledges that many doubt whether human behavior can be subjected to scientific laws due to its apparent unpredictability and complexity. Addressing this question is crucial for establishing moral sciences as legitimate fields of study, as it determines whether the principles of causation that apply to natural events can also be applied to human conduct. Quote 6. The question whether the law of causality applies in the same strict sense to human actions as to other phenomena is the celebrated controversy concerning the freedom of the will. Mill addresses the age-old debate on whether human actions are governed by causality, just like any other natural event. This debate, often framed as a conflict between free will and determinism, has divided both philosophers and religious thinkers for centuries. Mill supports the notion of determinism, suggesting that human actions follow a predictable pattern when one knows the motives and character of an individual. However, he also acknowledges that the way this concept is often articulated can mislead, making it appear degrading or inconsistent with human dignity. Mill's aim is to clarify the idea of causation in human actions, distancing it from notions of compulsion or inevitability that are often erroneously associated with determinism. Quote 7. Correctly conceived, the doctrine called philosophical necessity is simply this, that, given the motives which are present to an individual's mind, and given likewise the character and disposition of the individual, the manner in which he will act might be unerringly inferred. Mill explains that the concept of philosophical necessity asserts that if one knows both the motives influencing an individual and the individual's character, their actions can be predicted with certainty. This idea does not imply a lack of freedom, but rather that actions are consistent outcomes of the interplay between motives and disposition. Mill emphasizes that this understanding is not incompatible with the feeling of freedom. As people often know, their actions are predictable without feeling constrained. The misinterpretation arises when necessity is seen as implying an unbreakable bond or coercion, which Mill refutes by clarifying that causation is about predictability rather than compulsion. Quote 8. But neither is any such mysterious compulsion now supposed by the best philosophical authorities to be exercised by any other cause over its effect. Mill argues against the common belief that causation involves some form of mystical or compelling force over an effect. He clarifies that modern philosophical thought rejects this notion and understands causation as simply the regular sequence of events, without implying any form of mysterious constraint. This misconception often leads people to wrongly perceive human actions as being controlled by an inevitable force, which contradicts their sense of moral freedom. Mill asserts that in both the realm of inanimate objects and human actions, causation is about consistent patterns rather than compulsion, thus maintaining the idea of personal freedom even within a framework of determinism. Quote 9. The associations derived from the ordinary sense of the term will adhere to it in spite of all we can do. And though the doctrine of necessity, as stated by most who hold it, is very remote from fatalism, it is probable that most necessitarians are fatalists, more or less, in their feelings. Mill notes that the word necessity carries associations that inevitably lead people to think of inevitability and lack of control, which makes the philosophical doctrine of necessity easily confused with fatalism. He suggests that even those who support determinism often unconsciously adopt fatalistic attitudes, feeling that their actions are predetermined and beyond their influence. This misunderstanding prevents them from recognizing their capacity for self-determination and change. Mill emphasizes that, unlike fatalism, which asserts that outcomes are inevitable regardless of human effort, philosophical necessity acknowledges that individuals play an active role in shaping their character and actions. Quote 10. A person feels morally free, who feels that his habits or his temptations are not his masters, but he theirs. Mill explains that the feeling of moral freedom comes from a sense of mastery over one's habits and temptations, rather than being controlled by them. This sense of freedom means that an individual, even when influenced by desires or habits, has the capacity to resist or change. Mill argues that true freedom is about having the ability to direct one's actions according to one's own decisions, rather than being overpowered by external forces or ingrained habits. This feeling of being in control is essential for a sense of moral autonomy, and Mill suggests that it is crucial for achieving virtue and self-improvement. Quote 11. It is a common notion, or at least it is implied in many common modes of speech, that the thoughts, feelings, and actions of sentient beings are not a subject of science, in the same strict sense in which this is true of the objects of outward nature. Mill argues against the popular belief that human thoughts, feelings, and actions cannot be studied scientifically in the same manner as physical phenomena. He suggests that this belief stems from a misunderstanding about what constitutes a subject of science. Mill contends that anything that follows a set of consistent laws can be considered a subject of scientific inquiry, even if those laws have not yet been discovered. By challenging this notion, Mill sets the stage for discussing the possibility of a science of human nature, where human behavior can be understood through systematic observation and deduction, similar to the study of natural events. Quote 12. The science of human nature is of this description. It falls far short of the standard of exactness now realized in astronomy, but there is no reason that it should not be as much a science as tidology is, or as astronomy was when its calculations had only mastered the main phenomena, but not the perturbations. Mill describes the science of human nature as inherently less precise compared to fields like astronomy. He acknowledges that while astronomy has reached a level of exactness by accounting for all relevant factors, the science of human behavior cannot achieve the same precision due to the complexity and variability of human circumstances. Nevertheless, Mill asserts that the science of human nature can be just as legitimate as other sciences, like the study of tides, tidology, which involves some predictable elements alongside uncontrollable factors. By highlighting these parallels, Mill emphasizes that the science of human nature is still a valid field of study, even if it cannot achieve perfect predictability. Quote 13. The impressions and actions of human beings are not solely the result of their present circumstances, but the joint result of those circumstances and of the characters of the individuals. Mill argues that human behavior is influenced by both external circumstances and individual character, making it inherently unpredictable. This dual influence means that even if we fully understood all present conditions affecting a person, we still couldn't predict their behavior with absolute certainty, as individual character plays a crucial role. This complexity makes the science of human nature different from exact sciences, where all influencing factors can be identified and calculated. Mill emphasizes that while individual actions may not always be predictable, the science of human nature can still make reliable generalizations about human behavior at the collective level, which can be useful for political and social analysis. Quote 14. An approximate generalization is, in social inquiries, for most practical purposes, equivalent to an exact one. That which is only probable when asserted of individual human beings, indiscriminately selected, being certain when affirmed of the character and collective conduct of masses. Mill asserts that in social sciences, approximate generalizations are often sufficient because they are practically equivalent to exact laws when applied to large groups of people. While it may be impossible to predict the behavior of an individual with complete accuracy, the same predictions can become highly reliable when applied to the collective behavior of a group, community, or society. This idea supports the validity of social sciences, suggesting that they can effectively guide our understanding of human conduct on a broad scale, despite their inability to offer precise predictions for individual cases. Mill thus positions the science of human nature as fundamentally useful for understanding and guiding social behavior and policies. Quote 15. The science of human nature may be said to exist in proportion as the approximate truths which compose a practical knowledge of mankind can be exhibited as corollaries from the universal laws of human nature on which they rest. Mill argues that the science of human nature gains its scientific validity by connecting approximate generalizations about human behavior to more fundamental, universal laws. These generalizations should be viewed as consequences of the underlying laws that govern human nature. By doing this, the boundaries and applicability of these generalizations can be better understood, allowing for more reliable deductions in different circumstances. This connection between empirical observations and universal laws is what gives the study of human nature a genuine scientific character, enabling it to make predictions that go beyond specific experiences and apply to a wide range of situations. Quote 16. The phenomena of mind, then, are the various feelings of our nature, both those improperly called physical and those peculiarly designated as mental. And by the laws of mind, I mean the laws according to which those feelings generate one another. Mill defines the scope of mental phenomena, stating that they include both sensations, often mislabeled as physical, and other distinctly mental experiences. He clarifies that, by laws of mind, he refers to the rules governing how these different feelings or states of consciousness influence and generate each other. Mill insists on viewing sensations as states of mind rather than as purely physical events, emphasizing that the mind, as the seat of experience, encompasses all these varied feelings. This perspective underpins his broader argument for studying mental phenomena through their internal relationships, rather than relying solely on physical explanations. Quote 17. All states of mind are immediately caused either by other states of mind or by states of body. Mill presents a clear distinction between the causation of mental states. He asserts that every mental experience is either the direct result of a preceding mental state or induced by a bodily condition, such as a physical sensation. This division forms the foundation of his argument that mental laws can be studied independently of physical laws. While acknowledging that states like sensations have obvious physical causes, Mill argues that other mental states, such as thoughts and emotions, may not necessarily originate from physical processes. Instead, they often arise from a chain of mental associations, thereby suggesting that a distinct science of psychology is both necessary and valid, even in the face of competing physiological explanations. Quote 18. To reject the resource of psychological analysis and construct the theory of the mind solely on such data as physiology at present affords seems to me as great an error in principle and an even more serious one in practice. Mill cautions against the tendency to dismiss psychological inquiry in favor of physiological explanations alone. He believes that relying solely on current physiological data to understand mental phenomena undermines the complexity of the mind and disregards valuable insights from psychological analysis. While acknowledging the importance of physiology in understanding mental states, he insists that mental phenomena should also be studied through direct observation of their relationships and associations. He emphasizes that psychological inquiry, despite its imperfections, is more advanced than the corresponding area of physiology and offers a more reliable basis for understanding the workings of the human mind. Quote 19. The generation of one class of mental phenomena from another, whenever it can be made out, is a highly interesting fact in psychological chemistry, but it no more supersedes the necessity of an experimental study of the generated phenomenon than a knowledge of the properties of oxygen and sulfur enables us to deduce those of sulfuric acid without specific observation and experiment. Mill introduces the concept of psychological chemistry to describe how complex mental phenomena can arise from simpler elements, similar to chemical compounds. He emphasizes that understanding how basic feelings or ideas combine to form more intricate states does not eliminate the need for direct experimental study of the resulting complex states, just as knowing the properties of chemical elements like oxygen and sulfur does not eliminate the need for studying sulfuric acid directly. The analysis of basic mental components cannot replace a thorough examination of the emergent properties of more complex mental states. This analogy underscores the importance of both theoretical and empirical approaches in understanding the full spectrum of mental phenomena. Quote 20. Whether organic causes exercise a direct influence over any other classes of mental phenomena is hitherto as far from being ascertained as is the precise nature of the organic conditions, even in the case of instincts. Mill acknowledges the ongoing uncertainty regarding the extent to which physiological factors directly affect mental phenomena beyond basic sensations and instincts. He points out that while some aspects of mental life, such as instincts, may have clear physical underpinnings, The relationship between other mental phenomena and bodily conditions remains ambiguous. Mill also highlights the rapid progress in cerebral physiology, suggesting that future discoveries may shed light on these relationships. However, he remains cautious, asserting that current evidence does not fully support the claims of theories like phrenology, which attempt to directly link mental traits to specific brain structures. Quote 21. The laws of mind, as characterized in the preceding chapter, compose the universal or abstract portion of the philosophy of human nature, and all the truths of common experience, constituting a practical knowledge of mankind, must, to the extent to which they are truths, be results or consequences of these. Mill argues that the fundamental laws governing mental phenomena form the foundation of human nature, and that the practical knowledge of human behavior gathered from everyday experiences can be understood as a consequence of these deeper laws. Empirical observations of human behavior are thus secondary to the causal laws that generate them. Mill emphasizes that while practical generalizations about behavior may hold true in limited contexts, they are not the fundamental principles themselves, but rather the outcomes of deeper and more universal causal processes governing the human mind. This distinction between empirical generalizations and underlying causal laws forms a basis for a more systematic understanding of human nature. Quote 22. Even if they were universally and exactly true within the bounds of experience, which they never are, still they are not the ultimate laws of human action. They are not the principles of human nature, but results of those principles under the circumstance in which mankind have happened to be placed. Mill highlights the limitations of empirical observations about human behavior, stating that even if these observations appear universally true, they do not represent the fundamental laws of human nature. Instead, they are the outcomes of how these underlying principles manifest under specific circumstances. He points out that empirical generalizations cannot be relied upon as absolute truths, as they only apply within the specific contexts in which they were observed. The true laws of human behavior are universal and must explain why these empirical generalizations hold under certain conditions, emphasizing the need to go beyond surface-level observations to understand the underlying mechanisms that drive human action. Quote 23. Human beings do not all feel and act alike in the same circumstances, but it is possible to determine what makes one person, in a given position, feel or act in one way, another in another. Mill asserts that while people do not necessarily respond uniformly to the same circumstances, it is possible to understand why different individuals react differently. This understanding lies in recognizing the factors that influence individual character formation and how these factors interact with specific situations. Mill argues that although individuals are shaped by unique experiences and circumstances, there are universal principles governing how character is formed, allowing us to analyze the reasons behind these differences. By understanding the causes behind varying behaviors, we can gain insight into the complex interplay between character and circumstance that leads to different outcomes for different people. Quote 24. The laws, then, of the formation of character being the principal object of scientific inquiry into human nature, it remains to determine the method of investigation best fitted for ascertaining them. Mill states that understanding the laws governing the formation of human character is the primary objective of studying human nature. He emphasizes the importance of determining an appropriate method for investigating these laws, which involves examining both the general principles of the mind and the complex circumstances that shape individual behavior. Mill argues that the formation of character is a highly intricate process influenced by numerous factors, making it challenging to study through direct experimentation or observation alone. He advocates for a deductive approach, in which the general principles of the mind are used to infer the consequences of particular sets of circumstances on character development. Quote 25. A science is thus formed, to which I would propose to give the name of ethology, or the science of character, from ethos, a word corresponding to the term character, as I here use it, than any other word in the same language. Mill introduces the concept of ethology, which he defines as the science of character formation. The term ethos refers to character or the guiding beliefs and attitudes that influence behavior. Ethology, according to Mill, is distinct from general psychology, which deals with the elementary laws of the mind. Instead, ethology aims to determine how character is shaped under specific circumstances, considering both physical and moral influences. By understanding these influences systematically, ethology provides a foundation for practical applications, such as education, by helping to shape favorable conditions for character development. Mill envisions this science as a key to understanding the complexities of human behavior and the factors that influence it. Quote 26. Next, after the science of individual man, comes the science of man in society, of the actions of collective masses of mankind, and the various phenomena which constitute social life. Mill introduces the idea that after studying the individual, the next step is to understand human beings in the context of society. He emphasizes that social science deals with the behavior of groups and the phenomena that emerge from social interactions. This field is inherently more complex than studying individuals because it involves a greater number of interacting factors and influences, including psychological and physical elements that affect masses of people. Mill points out that the study of society as a science is still in its infancy, partly because of a prevailing prejudice against the notion that social phenomena can be scientifically analyzed, similar to natural sciences. Despite the challenges, Mill argues for the legitimacy of treating social science with the same rigor as other fields, emphasizing the potential to derive meaningful generalizations about society. Quote 27. The condition indeed of politics, as a branch of knowledge, was, until very lately, and has scarcely even yet ceased to be, that which Bacon animadverted on, as the natural state of the sciences while their cultivation is abandoned to practitioners. Mill compares the state of political science to the early state of other sciences, as described by Francis Bacon. He criticizes the way politics has traditionally been approached, likening it to a field that has been left to practitioners who focus only on practical, immediate solutions without developing a foundational understanding of the underlying principles. Just as medicine originally focused on treating symptoms without understanding physiology, politics has often dealt with solving isolated problems without a comprehensive understanding of social dynamics. Mill suggests that this approach is fundamentally flawed, and that for politics to progress as a science, it must be developed as a systematic field of inquiry with a solid theoretical foundation, rather than simply responding to day-to-day exigencies. Quote 28. The vulgar notion accordingly is that all pretension to lay down general truths on politics and society is quackery, that no universality and no certainty are attainable in such matters. Mill addresses the common belief that it is impossible to establish universal truths in politics and social science, and that any claim to do so is merely pseudoscience. He acknowledges that this skepticism is not without reason, as many political thinkers have mistakenly tried to impose a one-size-fits-all solution to complex social issues, ignoring the diversity of conditions in different societies. However, Mill argues that this does not mean that social phenomena cannot be governed by universal laws. Rather, it means that the diversity of circumstances must be accounted for, and the application of general principles must be adapted accordingly. By understanding the underlying causes of social phenomena, it is possible to establish meaningful generalizations that respect the complexities of different social contexts. Quote 29. All phenomena of society are phenomena of human nature, generated by the action of outward circumstances upon masses of human beings. Mill argues that social phenomena are fundamentally rooted in human nature and arise from the interaction of individuals with their surrounding circumstances. He suggests that if human thought, emotions, and actions follow consistent laws, then the collective phenomena of society must also conform to fixed laws, emerging from the combination of human behaviors influenced by external factors. Mill emphasizes that although social phenomena are complex and influenced by numerous and changing circumstances, they are still governed by underlying principles. Understanding these principles is essential for analyzing and predicting social changes, even if the exact outcomes cannot be forecasted with the same precision as in natural sciences like astronomy. Quote 30. The science of society would have attained a very high point of perfection if it enabled us, in any given condition of social affairs, to understand by what causes it had, in any and every particular, been made what it was. Mill explains the goal of social science, which is not necessarily to predict the future of society with certainty, but rather to understand the causes that have shaped a society's present condition. He believes that the science of society would be highly advanced if it could accurately identify the causes of the current state of social affairs, predict the direction of change, and assess the likely effects of different influences on the future. This level of understanding would allow us to make informed decisions about how to modify or accelerate social outcomes. Mill acknowledges the difficulty of making precise predictions due to the complexity and variability of social factors, but he insists that the systematic study of general laws can provide valuable insights for guiding social development. Quote 31. Men are not, when brought together, converted into another kind of substance, with different properties, as hydrogen and oxygen are different from water, or as hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, and azote are different from nerves, muscles, and tendons. Mill emphasizes that individuals in society retain the same properties as they do in isolation. Unlike chemical elements that combine to create substances with entirely new properties, human beings do not fundamentally change when they come together in a social setting. The behaviors and characteristics of individuals in a group can be understood through the same principles that apply to individuals, as there are no fundamentally new properties that emerge solely because they are in a group. Mill is critical of the chemical view of society that treats social phenomena as entirely distinct from individual actions, instead arguing for a continuity between individual and collective behavior. Quote 32. The first difficulty which meets us in the attempt to apply experimental methods for ascertaining the laws of social phenomena is that we are without the means of making artificial experiments. Mill points out a fundamental challenge in studying social phenomena: the inability to conduct controlled experiments as one can in the natural sciences. Social science cannot create artificial scenarios to manipulate variables and observe outcomes because societies are complex and dynamic, with countless factors interacting simultaneously. Unlike natural sciences, where laboratory conditions can be tightly controlled, social phenomena occur in real time and under constantly changing conditions, making it impossible to isolate and test individual variables in a controlled manner. This limitation forces social scientists to rely on observation of historical and contemporary events rather than conducting experiments, which complicates efforts to establish causal relationships. Quote 33. National prosperity is always the collective result of a multitude of favorable circumstances. Mill explains that the wealth and success of a nation cannot be attributed to a single cause, but is rather the outcome of many favorable factors working together. He critiques simplistic arguments that attempt to explain complex social phenomena, such as national prosperity, by pointing to a single policy or factor. The prosperity of a country is influenced by numerous interconnected causes, including economic, social, political, and cultural factors, which collectively contribute to its development. Mill's point is that any attempt to understand national success must account for this complexity, as no one factor alone can adequately explain it. This highlights the limitations of methods that attempt to deduce social outcomes through isolated variables without considering the broader context. Quote 34. The causes of every social phenomenon which we are particularly interested about, security, wealth, freedom, good government, public virtue, general intelligence, or their opposites, are infinitely numerous, especially the external or remote causes, which alone are, for the most part, accessible to direct observation. Mill argues that social phenomena like security, wealth, and freedom are influenced by an intricate web of numerous causes, Many of these causes are external or indirect, meaning they are not immediately observable or easy to identify. Mill emphasizes the inherent complexity of social phenomena, where countless factors may have an influence, making it challenging to attribute an outcome to a single cause. This complexity necessitates a careful analysis of the underlying relationships and interactions between different factors, as relying solely on superficial observations of outcomes can lead to misleading conclusions. Mill's insight underscores the difficulty of applying simple causal models to explain the multifaceted nature of social events. Quote 35. Applied to social phenomena, it presupposes that the causes from which part of the effect proceeded are already known, and as we have shown that these cannot have been known by specific experience, they must have been learnt by deduction from principles of human nature. Mill argues that when using methods like the method of residues to analyze social phenomena, it is necessary to have prior knowledge of certain causes that contribute to the observed effects. Since these causes cannot be fully known through direct observation alone, they must be deduced from more general principles of human behavior. Mill highlights the inadequacy of relying solely on empirical observations to explain social phenomena, as this approach fails to account for the complex and often hidden causes at play. Instead, he advocates for a deductive approach that draws on established principles of human nature to better understand and explain social outcomes, suggesting that empirical methods alone are insufficient for grasping the full scope of social dynamics. Quote 36. These thinkers perceive, what the partisans of the chemical or experimental theory do not, that the science of society must necessarily be deductive. Mill notes that some thinkers, unlike those who advocate for the chemical method in social sciences, correctly recognize that the study of society must rely on deductive reasoning. However, their understanding is incomplete, as they often treat social science similarly to geometry, failing to grasp the complex and dynamic nature of social interactions. Mill emphasizes that a purely deductive approach, like that used in geometry, does not account for the multitude of interacting forces that shape social phenomena. Social science requires a more nuanced, deductive approach, similar to what is used in natural sciences that deal with causal relationships, such as astronomy and physics. Quote 37. There is not among these most complex and, for that reason, most modifiable of all phenomena, anyone over which innumerable forces do not exercise influence, which does not depend on a conjunction of very many causes. Mill argues that social phenomena are influenced by numerous interacting forces, making them highly complex and subject to constant modification. He points out that unlike in geometry, where theorems apply universally without interference, social phenomena result from a combination of causes that can modify or counteract each other. This complexity means that social science cannot be approached by assuming that one cause or principle alone is responsible for any given social outcome. Instead, a comprehensive understanding of social behavior requires considering the interplay of many different influences that collectively shape social dynamics. Quote 38. Some of the earlier scientific inquirers into politics, in particular Hobbes, assumed this proposition, not by implication, but avowedly, as the foundation of their doctrine, and attempted to build a complete philosophy of politics thereupon. Mill uses the example of Thomas Hobbes to illustrate the flawed geometrical method in social science. Hobbes assumed that fear was the fundamental driving force behind the formation of societies, and tried to construct an entire political theory based on this single principle. Mill criticizes this approach for oversimplifying the complexities of human behavior and ignoring other important motivations and influences. By relying solely on one aspect of human nature, Hobbes attempted to create a comprehensive theory that ultimately failed to account for the diverse and interacting causes that shape political and social life. Mill's critique underscores the dangers of building a theory on a single oversimplified premise without considering the broader context. Quote 39. The profound and original thinkers, who are commonly known under this description, founded their general theory of government on one comprehensive premise, namely, that men's actions are always determined by their interests. Mill examines the interest-based philosophy of the Bentham school as an example of the geometrical method in politics. He explains that these thinkers, including Jeremy Bentham, built their political theories on the assumption that people are always motivated by their self-interest. This assumption was used as the foundation for explaining political behavior and determining the best forms of government. Mill points out, however, that this premise is not universally true, as human behavior is influenced by many factors beyond mere self-interest. While the theory might hold in general terms, it fails to account for the full complexity of human motivation, including altruistic or community-oriented actions, and thus falls short as a comprehensive explanation for political behavior. Quote 40. The whole of the qualities of human nature influence those phenomena, and there is not one which influences them in a small degree. Mill argues that social phenomena are shaped by all aspects of human nature, each of which plays a significant role. He criticizes the geometrical method for focusing on a limited set of human qualities, such as self-interest, while neglecting other important factors that also influence social outcomes. By emphasizing that every quality of human nature has a substantial impact, Mill underscores the need for a more holistic approach to studying society. He advocates for a method that takes into account the full range of human motivations and interactions, as failing to do so leads to incomplete and potentially misleading conclusions about social behavior and governance. Quote 41. The effect produced in social phenomena by any complex set of circumstances amounts precisely to the sum of the effects of the circumstances taken singly. Mill argues that the effects of social phenomena can be understood by summing the effects of each contributing factor individually. This means that social outcomes are not caused by any one factor acting in isolation, but rather by a combination of multiple influences, each of which contributes to the final result. The complexity of social phenomena arises not from the number of laws governing them, which is relatively limited, but from the vast number of elements interacting simultaneously according to those laws. Mill emphasizes the importance of understanding how different causes interact and compound their effects to achieve a comprehensive understanding of social dynamics. Quote 42. The same superior complexity, which renders the instrument of deduction more necessary, renders it also more precarious. Mill acknowledges that while the deductive method is crucial for understanding complex social phenomena, it also becomes more uncertain and prone to error when applied to such intricate systems. The complexity of society makes deduction essential, as it allows for the synthesis of multiple influences into a cohesive understanding of their effects. However, this very complexity also makes it difficult to accurately account for all variables and to predict outcomes with certainty. Mill warns that the deductive method, although powerful, must be applied with caution in social sciences due to the numerous and unpredictable ways in which different factors interact. Quote 43. The ground of confidence in any concrete deductive science is not the a priori reasoning itself, but the accordance between its results and those of observation a posteriori. Mill explains that the reliability of deductive reasoning in social science is not based solely on logical conclusions derived from theoretical premises. Instead, it depends on how well these conclusions align with actual observations. Verification through empirical evidence is crucial to confirm the validity of deductive theories. Without empirical verification, the conclusions of deduction are incomplete and unreliable, especially given the complexity of social phenomena. Mill highlights the need for a balance between theoretical reasoning and empirical observation to ensure that the deductions made in social science are grounded in real-world data and can withstand scrutiny. Quote 44. Sociology, considered as a system of deductions a priori, cannot be a science of positive predictions, but only of tendencies. Mill asserts that sociology, when approached through deductive reasoning, cannot provide absolute predictions about specific social events, but can instead indicate general tendencies. This means that while we may understand how a particular cause will likely influence society under certain conditions, we cannot determine with certainty how it will interact with the many other influences present at the same time. The complex and interconnected nature of social phenomena means that the best we can achieve through deduction is an understanding of likely trends and general directions rather than precise outcomes. This limitation highlights the inherent uncertainty of predicting social behavior. Quote 45. Political economy considers mankind as occupied solely in acquiring and consuming wealth, and aims at showing what is the course of action into which mankind, living in a state of society, would be impelled if that motive were absolute ruler of all their actions. Mill describes political economy as a branch of social science that simplifies human behavior by assuming that the pursuit of wealth is the sole motivator. This assumption allows for the development of a theoretical framework that explains how individuals might act if the desire for wealth were their only concern. Although this is a simplified view of human nature, it serves as a useful approximation for understanding economic behavior. Mill acknowledges that this approach does not account for the full range of human motivations, but argues that it provides a practical way to analyze economic activities, which can then be adjusted by considering other influences that might alter these purely economic tendencies. Quote 46. Extensive and important practical guidance may be derived, in any given state of society, from general propositions such as those above indicated, even though the modifying influence of the miscellaneous causes which the theory does not take into account, as well as the effect of the general social changes in progress, be provisionally overlooked. Mill suggests that despite the limitations of social theories, which often overlook numerous modifying factors, these theories can still provide valuable practical guidance for a particular state of society. He acknowledges that the predictions derived from such theories may not account for all influencing factors or the effect of ongoing social changes. However, even with these simplifications, the general principles offered by the theory can still be useful. This underscores the idea that while social science may not offer perfect precision due to the complexity and variability of social conditions, it remains a helpful tool for understanding and addressing social issues in a broad sense. Quote 47. Though many of its conclusions are only locally true, its method of investigation is applicable universally, and as whoever has solved a certain number of algebraic equations can without difficulty solve all others of the same kind, so whoever knows the political economy of England, or even of Yorkshire, knows that of all nations, actual or possible. Mill explains that the conclusions of political economy may be limited in their applicability to specific social contexts, but the method of investigation used in the science is universally valid. He draws an analogy to solving algebraic equations, suggesting that once someone understands how to solve certain types of problems, they can apply the same method to similar problems elsewhere. Similarly, once one understands the economic principles of a particular society, such as England, they can apply these principles to other nations by making appropriate adjustments. This emphasizes the value of a universal method of reasoning, even if the specific conclusions drawn from it are only locally applicable and must be modified to suit different contexts. Quote 48. Yet, to whoever well considers the matter, it must appear that the laws of national or collective character are by far the most important class of sociological laws. Mill asserts that understanding the laws of national or collective character is crucial for sociology. He believes that the character of a people, comprising their opinions, feelings, and habits, is not only the most interesting aspect of any society, but also one of the most influential. This character shapes and is shaped by social institutions and circumstances, creating a feedback loop that significantly impacts the state of society. The character of a society influences laws and customs, which in turn help shape future character. Mill highlights the importance of studying collective character because it plays a fundamental role in shaping all other social phenomena, thus making it central to a comprehensive understanding of society. Quote 49. The more highly the science of ethology is cultivated, and the better the diversities of individual and national character are understood, the smaller, probably, will the number of propositions become which it will be considered safe to build on as universal principles of human nature. Mill argues that as the science of ethology, the study of character, advances and we gain a deeper understanding of the differences in individual and national character, it is likely that fewer generalizations about human nature will be considered universally valid. He suggests that a more nuanced understanding of character will reveal significant variations across individuals and societies, making it difficult to apply broad, one-size-fits-all principles. This implies that social science must take into account the diversity of human experiences and behaviors, rather than relying on simplistic, universal assumptions, as the differences between individuals and cultures can significantly influence social outcomes. Quote 50. To prove, in short, that our science and our knowledge of the particular case render us competent to predict the future, we must show that they would have enabled us to predict the present and the past. Mill emphasizes the importance of verifying social theories by demonstrating that they can accurately explain both the present and the past. He argues that in order to have confidence in a theory's ability to predict future social outcomes, it must first be shown that the theory could have predicted what has already occurred. This means that social scientists must be able to account for the current and historical state of social phenomena, based on the same principles they use to make future predictions. This form of verification helps ensure that the theories are well-grounded and that their conclusions are reliable, thereby providing a solid basis for making practical decisions about the future. Quote 51. There are two kinds of sociological inquiry. What effect will follow from a given cause? What are the causes which produce and the phenomena which characterize states of society generally? Mill distinguishes between two approaches to sociological inquiry, one that examines the effects of specific causes within a given state of society, and another that investigates the general conditions and causes that shape different states of society as a whole. The first type of inquiry is concerned with predicting the outcomes of particular interventions or changes, while the second seeks to understand the fundamental laws that govern the evolution of societies. Mill highlights that the general science of society must underpin and guide more specialized inquiries, ensuring that conclusions drawn from specific cases are grounded in a broader understanding of societal dynamics. Quote 52. What is called a state of society is the simultaneous state of all the greater social facts or phenomena. Mill defines a state of society as the combined condition of various social elements, including knowledge, intellectual and moral culture, industry, wealth distribution, class relations, beliefs, government, and customs at a given point in time. These elements are interdependent and form an intricate web of social facts that influence each other. Mill emphasizes that a state of society is not characterized by individual parts, but rather by the overall condition of the entire social organism. Understanding a state of society requires considering all these elements simultaneously, as they collectively determine the social environment and its evolution. Quote 53. The mutual correlation between the different elements of each state of society is therefore a derivative law, resulting from the laws which regulate the succession between one state of society and another. Mill argues that the relationships between various social elements within a given state of society are derived from the fundamental laws governing how one state of society transitions into the next. He suggests that understanding the uniformities of coexistence among social elements requires knowledge of the causal laws that drive social change over time. The current state of society is always shaped by the preceding one, and the correlations between different social phenomena are a result of this continuity. Thus, the key to understanding the coexistence of social facts lies in studying the processes that govern societal evolution. Quote 54. The progressiveness of the human race is the foundation on which a method of philosophizing in the social science has been of late years erected. Mill explains that the idea of progress is central to the modern approach to social science, particularly in understanding the evolution of societies. Unlike earlier thinkers like Vico, who believed that human history followed a cyclical pattern, modern philosophers view history as a trajectory, a progressive sequence of transformations rather than a recurring cycle. Mill points out that this concept of progress underlies recent attempts to discover a law of progress by analyzing historical trends. This method aims to predict future societal developments by identifying regular patterns in historical progression. Though Mill warns that such generalizations, without deeper connections to the underlying psychological and ethological laws, remain empirical and not fully scientific. Quote 55. The laws of the succession of states of society can only be ascertained by the inverse deductive method. Mill asserts that understanding the sequence of societal states requires using the inverse deductive method, which starts from empirical historical observations and works backwards to identify the underlying causes. He acknowledges that it would be nearly impossible to deduce the entire history of human development purely from the principles of human nature due to the complexity and length of the sequence. Therefore, the inverse method, which involves analyzing historical data to formulate general laws and then connecting these laws to the basic principles of human behavior, is essential for constructing a general science of society. This approach ensures that historical generalizations are grounded in a solid understanding of human nature, providing a more reliable basis for predicting future social developments. Quote 56. There are some circumstances which, being found in all societies without exception, and in the greatest degree where the social union is most complete, may be considered as conditions of the existence of the complex phenomenon called a state. Mill explains that there are certain conditions that must be present in any society for it to exist as a cohesive state. These include laws, some form of organized government, and an enforcement mechanism that ensures the adherence of individuals to the societal norms. These elements are found in every society that has managed to maintain its collective existence. By examining these essential features, Mill suggests that we can derive general principles about what makes political and social unity possible. These elements, though initially empirical, can be verified by general laws of human behavior to achieve scientific credibility, as they provide a foundational basis for understanding the structure of stable societies. Quote 57. The second condition of permanent political society has been found to be the existence, in some form or other, of the feeling of allegiance or loyalty. Mill identifies allegiance or loyalty to a common authority or institution as a crucial element for the stability of any political society. This allegiance can be directed towards a variety of entities, such as a god, monarch, laws, or principles of freedom and equality. Regardless of the form, what is critical is that there be something in society considered beyond question, a source of stability and permanence that people agree upon as sacrosanct. This feeling of loyalty is what allows societies to weather internal conflicts without falling apart, as it creates a shared foundation that unites different segments of the population despite their differences. Without this shared allegiance, societies are prone to internal division and instability. Quote 58. The third essential condition of stability in political society is a strong and active principle of cohesion among the members of the same community or state. Mill argues that the stability of a political society also requires a strong sense of cohesion among its members. This cohesion is not about hostility towards outsiders or blind nationalism, but rather about a genuine sense of solidarity and shared interest among people living under the same governance. It involves recognizing that harm to any segment of the community ultimately affects the whole, and that people are bound by common interests and goals. Historical examples, such as the strength of ancient Rome and the failure of certain modern states like Ireland under British rule, illustrate how this sense of national unity, or its absence, significantly impacts a society's stability and capacity for self-determination. The more strongly people feel connected to one another and their collective well-being, the more resilient their society becomes. Quote 59. The empirical laws which are most readily obtained by generalization from history do not amount to this. They are not the middle principles themselves, but only evidence towards the establishment of such principles. Mill points out that the generalizations we can draw from history are usually not sufficient to establish fundamental scientific laws about social dynamics. These empirical observations tend to indicate trends or tendencies, such as the decline of militarism or the rise of industrial pursuits. But they are far removed from the basic principles that underlie these changes. Because there are too many intervening factors and complexities involved, historical generalizations alone cannot fully explain the processes at play. Instead, they serve as pieces of evidence that can guide us towards discovering the more profound middle principles that bridge the gap between basic human nature and the complex social realities observed in history. Quote 60. From this accumulated evidence, we are justified in concluding that the order of human progression, in all respects, will mainly depend on the order of progression in the intellectual convictions of mankind, that is, on the law of the successive transformations of human opinions. Mill concludes that the overall progression of society depends largely on the progression of intellectual beliefs and opinions. Changes in society, whether in the material, moral, primarily driven by shifts in the prevailing ideas and convictions of the people. History has shown that every significant social change has been preceded by a transformation in beliefs, whether religious, philosophical, or scientific, that laid the foundation for those changes. Therefore, understanding the evolution of human opinions is key to understanding broader societal changes, as it is these intellectual shifts that ultimately shape the trajectory of human progress. The task of social science, then, is to identify the laws governing these shifts in opinion, thereby enabling us to understand and potentially predict the broader progression of society. Quote 61. The collective series of social phenomena, in other words, the course of history, is subject to general laws which philosophy may possibly detect. Mill argues that history, like natural sciences, is governed by general laws that can potentially be discovered through philosophical inquiry. He points out that this idea, though relatively novel in his own country at the time of writing, had been more widely accepted by thinkers on the continent. Mill believes that by studying the collective events of history, we can identify patterns and establish scientific laws that explain social phenomena. The recognition that history follows certain regularities is crucial for developing a deeper understanding of human behavior and society, and for moving beyond the view that history is merely a collection of random or disconnected events. Quote 62. What act is there which all would consider as more completely dependent on individual character and on the exercise of individual free will than that of slaying a fellow creature? Yet in any large country, the number of murders, in proportion to the population, varies very little from one year to another. Mill highlights a surprising regularity in human behavior, using the example of murder. Despite being seemingly dependent on individual choices, the number of murders in a given population remains remarkably consistent over time. This observation supports the idea that even actions that appear entirely driven by free will are subject to general social influences that can be statistically analyzed. Mill uses this example to illustrate that, when viewed at a large scale, human behavior follows certain predictable patterns. The factors influencing such behaviors include both individual characteristics and broader social conditions, which collectively lead to this regularity. Quote 63. The theory of the subjection of social progress to invariable laws is often held in conjunction with the doctrine that social progress cannot be materially influenced by the exertions of individual persons or by the acts of governments. Mill points out that many people confuse the idea that social progress is governed by invariable laws with the belief that individuals or governments have no significant impact on that progress. He argues that this comes from conflating causation with fatalism. Just because history follows general laws does not mean that individual actions are irrelevant. Instead, these actions, especially those of exceptional individuals or governments, can have profound effects on the course of history. Mill asserts that while general laws provide a framework for social development, the specific direction and speed of progress can be significantly influenced by individuals who play pivotal roles, suggesting that human agency is an essential component of social evolution. Quote 64. Great men and great actions are seldom wasted. They send forth 1,000 unseen influences, more effective than those which are seen. Mill emphasizes the importance of exceptional individuals and their actions in shaping history. He argues that even if the immediate effects of a great leader or a significant action seem limited, their influence often extends beyond what is visible at the time. The contributions of such individuals may not always achieve their intended goals, but they often create lasting effects that shape future generations. Mill provides examples such as early heretics whose efforts appeared futile at the time, but ultimately inspired later reformers. This highlights the enduring impact of great individuals and their actions, which may not always be immediately apparent, but can influence the course of history in profound and unexpected ways. Quote 65. Historical science authorizes not absolute, but only conditional predictions. General causes count for much, but individuals also produce great changes in history and color its whole complexion long after their death. Mill argues that while historical science allows us to make predictions about social trends, these predictions are always conditional and subject to the influence of individuals. He explains that although general causes provide a framework for understanding historical developments, the actions of exceptional individuals can have lasting and significant effects. Mill uses examples from history, such as Julius Caesar and Themistocles, to illustrate how specific individuals have shaped the course of events in ways that were not inevitable. This suggests that while historical patterns are governed by general laws, the actions of great men can still alter the course of history, and their influence can persist long after their time. Quote 66. Morality not a science, but an art. Mill argues that morality is not a science in the conventional sense, as it does not consist of descriptive statements about facts, but rather consists of imperatives or prescriptive rules for conduct. These rules are more akin to art, which aims to achieve a particular end through the application of learned principles. In the case of morality, these ends are often related to what is considered good or virtuous behavior. Unlike science, which seeks to explain what is, morality involves prescribing what ought to be done, making it a practical discipline focused on achieving desirable outcomes. Therefore, Mill characterizes ethics as a portion of the art that corresponds to the sciences of human nature and society. Quote 67. The art proposes to itself an end to be attained, defines the end, and hands it over to the science. Mill explains the relationship between art and science by emphasizing that art defines the desired end, and then relies on science to determine how that end can be achieved. The art identifies the goal, such as promoting health or creating a building, and turns to science to understand the conditions and causes necessary to bring about that goal. Science then provides the theoretical understanding of how the desired effect can be produced. The art takes this scientific knowledge and transforms it into practical rules or guidelines to achieve the intended outcome. This dynamic demonstrates how art and science complement each other. Art identifies the purpose, and science supplies the means to fulfill it. Quote 68. Rules cannot be relied on without constantly referring back to the scientific laws on which they are founded. Mill emphasizes that rules of conduct, especially in complex affairs like those of states and societies, cannot be blindly followed without an understanding of the scientific principles that underlie them. Practical contingencies often require modifications or exceptions to the rules, and understanding when and how to make these adjustments requires a reference to the theoretical foundations of the rules. In simple manual arts, rules may be sufficient because the conditions are fewer and more apparent. However, in more complex contexts, adhering strictly to rules without considering the broader principles can lead to poor outcomes. Thus, practitioners must treat rules as provisional and be prepared to adapt them based on the underlying scientific understanding. Quote 69. The error is therefore apparent of those who would deduce the line of conduct proper to particular cases from supposed universal practical maxims. Mill criticizes the approach of deducing appropriate actions solely from rigid universal maxims without considering the specific circumstances of each case. He points out that practical decisions must account for the complexities of real-world situations, which often involve modifying or deviating from general rules. Those who adhere strictly to universal principles, without reference to the scientific context in which these principles apply, risk making decisions that may lead to undesirable consequences. Mill especially criticizes political reasoning that rigidly follows abstract principles, such as the sovereignty of the people or legitimacy, without considering the specific social and political context. He argues that true practical wisdom involves flexibility and adaptation to the circumstances rather than blind adherence to general principles. Quote 70. Every art consists of truths of science, arranged in the order suitable for some practical use. Mill explains that every art is composed of scientific truths, but these truths are organized to serve a practical purpose, rather than to illustrate the general order of the universe. Science seeks to understand cause and effect, while art focuses on achieving specific outcomes by using scientific knowledge. In art, the truths of science are reconfigured in a way that facilitates the achievement of practical goals. This means that art is not just about knowing scientific truths, but also about understanding how to apply these truths effectively to accomplish a desired objective. Mill's view highlights the practical orientation of art as distinct from the purely theoretical focus of science. The Logic of the Moral Sciences by John Stuart Mill ultimately emphasizes the necessity of a rigorous, systematic method for understanding the intricate and often unpredictable nature of human behavior. Mill advocates for the application of scientific reasoning to social phenomena, highlighting the importance of both induction and deduction in developing a reliable body of knowledge about human conduct. By recognizing the interplay between individual character and broader social influences, Mill offers a framework for advancing the moral sciences, aiming for both greater understanding and the potential for human progress.
Curious to dive into the mind of John Stuart Mill? With StudyLab Pro's Book GPT, it's possible. Ask questions, explore themes, and discover the depths of the logic of the moral sciences in an entirely new way. Start your conversation now by clicking on our logo. And if you're hungry for more educational content, subscribe to our channel to keep discovering, learning, and growing. Want more than just videos? Click on our logo now to join us on our platform for multiple choice tests, in-depth content, and tools to help you ace your studies. Get started now.